Hi, and welcome back to the Libro.fm podcast, a monthly series featuring interviews with authors, narrators, booksellers, and more.
On this episode, we had the pleasure to speak with one of our favorite narrators ever, Julia Whelan. She has narrated over 500 books and even wrote two of her own, including Thank You for Listening, that comes out on August 2nd.
The interview was super interesting and fun for us. We talked about her forthcoming book, obviously. We got tons of behind-the-scenes info about the audiobook recording process, AI, what that means for the audiobook industry, and tons of other stuff.
As always, thank you for listening to the podcast, and we hope you enjoy the interview.
Welcome to the podcast, Julia. We are so excited to have you today.
I am so excited to be here today.
Craig and I are huge fans of your work as a narrator, as an author, as an actor as well. And transparently, just so that you know, you have a lot of fans at Libro.fm. We have some colleagues who are very envious that we're the ones getting to talk to you today. So we promise to use our power responsibly and ask all of the questions they wanted us to cover.
Well, I'm a huge fan of Libro.fm, so it's very reciprocal.
Awesome.
You're also the podcast's first narrator guest, which, given that we're an audiobook company, is super exciting for us. And Karen and I were talking about how we just couldn't have started with a better narrator, honestly. Before we started recording, I was telling Julia the story of how I had to pause a book that you were the narrator of to start your book that you were the narrator of. And on our previous podcast, we were talking about book lovers. So there's been a lot of talk about your narration already on the podcast. So we're super excited to have you here. For folks who may not be familiar with your work, would you mind giving us like a little intro and just about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Julia Whelan. I have narrated probably about 500 audiobooks over the last 13 years or so. The highlights, let's see. I kind of look at some of these books as like the career defining moments, and Nora Roberts' The Witness was one. Jandy Nelson's The Sky is Everywhere was one. Gone Girl was one. Let's see. Oh, Educated, which I won the Audie for. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue.
I was going to be sad if you didn't mention that one, so I'm glad you. Yeah, I was like.
And then Taylor Jenkins Reid's books and Emily Henry's books, and yeah, I mean, I don't know. I always blank. It's like one of those you're just like, I don't know. What is this job even? What are books?
Cool. Well, so obviously you're a super prolific narrator, 500 books, which is just probably more books than people read in their whole lives. And you've done that in the past 13 years. So that's crazy and awesome. But you're also an author, because why not? Right. Super talented. So your new book, Thank You for Listening, comes out August 2nd, right? So just a couple weeks.
Yeah.
How you feeling?
I mean, whatever. It's going to be whatever it is. I'm just, at this point, I'm just like, it's coming out. Like, this is the thing about time. Time moves on, and it's going to happen.
It's too late now,
It's too late now. Like, it's happening. So
yeah, the boxes are, they're on their way to bookstores,
Things are shipped. I found, of course, one typo in audiobook pickups, and it was too late to fix it in the book. So now that's all I'm going to see. So,
it's fine when the second edition comes out. The first edition will have the typo, and it'll be worth money on eBay.
Absolutely, that's what I'm hoping for. I really wanted to create like a collector's edition of this book, so I'm feeling good about it.
Nailed it.
Let's go with that. It was totally on purpose. Yeah. So Karen and I were both lucky enough to get an early copy on Libro. And we spent the past week or so listening to it, and both really, really enjoyed it. We were saying that it struck such a good balance of being like laugh out loud funny at parts, but also like really heartbreaking at other parts. And obviously the audiobook version of it was amazing. We'd love if you could just like give us a little, or give the listeners like a little intro about what the book is about. And
sure. So my elevator pitch is pretty dreadful. I tend to go on and on. So just cut out whatever you don't want to use. But we have our main character is Swanee Chester, and she is a former actress turned audiobook narrator who suffered a pretty tragic event that ended her on-camera career, and also made her very skeptical of anything that the romance genre is selling. And she started out in her career recording romance under a pseudonym, which we can talk about later. But has since moved on to other books, bigger books, the important books. And she gets an offer, though, to record the last book written by a legendary romance novelist who actually gave Swanee her start in the industry. And the money is too good to pass up. She is currently trying to take care of her ailing grandmother, and so she decides to do it. And in the course of recording this novel, she gets to know, even though she doesn't know his name, her co-narrator, who is the hottest, most enigmatic male voice in romance audio. And through their relationship and friendship, she not only rediscovers love, but she also rediscovers who she is. And it is a journey of self-acceptance. And it is a lesson in what can happen when we actually take risks.
I think that was a great elevator pitch.
Okay, it was just long. It was like a Sears Tower elevator pitch. It was like, or whatever it's called now. It was, a very long pitch, but yeah.
Perfect.
So the book obviously has some autobiographical elements to it, like the main character wins an Audie award and so on. What was that, I guess, process like writing, where some parts are taken from, things that you've experienced and, other parts are obviously fictional?
Yeah. When I knew that I kind of went through this with the first book. With my first book, was people assumed it was actually a memoir. And so I was kind of primed for this, for people to think that this was, if not straight up autobiography, then at least autofiction. And kind of from the beginning, I tried to build a character who wasn't me. And the way that I was doing that was I just started from the premise of who would be doing this job and like be very good at it and like love doing it, but not be totally happy doing it. Because I love it and I'm very happy doing it, but there's no conflict there. So it's not interesting. So I built her kind of moving back from, what could make someone love this, but somehow not be satisfied. And to me, that came down to just not feeling like this was the plan and not feeling like you're doing what you were always thought you were supposed to be doing. And so that was, for me, that was always the biggest challenge, is like, there are certain common denominators to this industry that all narrators experience. There were things I could talk about in a way that felt like, I get the same questions over and over as a narrator, like when people just trying to understand what the job is. So I knew how to write that, but I definitely didn't want to write just an avatar of me in that world.
Oh, that's so fascinating. That makes yes. Where is the conflict in the narration world?
Yeah. But because it's a job that not a lot of actors enjoy doing, and so there's always that question of, a lot of people will do this kind of temporarily as like, the thing you do between other gigs. But I didn't want to write about that. I wanted to write about professional full-time narrators, the yeoman audiobook narrators. And if you're doing that with your life, like, you have to love it, because frankly, the money's not good enough. It's demanding, it's isolating, like, you have to love it. And so if you don't have that, then where's the conflict? So that's what I was dealing with.
It's so interesting that you say that, because I hadn't ever really put myself in the position of being an audiobook narrator. Like, what does this job look like? And there's a conversation early in the book with a panel that's happening in an event where someone puts their hand up and says, I want to do this. This should be my job. And one of the women on the panel says something like, well, do you want to sit in a dark room by yourself for 8 hours a day, stopping every time you make a mistake? And, if that sounds fun to you, then go for it, kind of thing. And that was an epiphany for me of, oh, this is what this job feels like.
Yeah. I mean, we have a number of narrators because we get asked that so often. We have kind of our stock answers to that question. And the real answer to that question is I direct people to a website called Narrator's Roadmap, which is a whole compendium compiled by Karen Commons, who's an amazing narrator, she has actually taken the time to build the resources. And I'm just always like, talk to Karen. Go to Narrator's Roadmap. When I'm not being snarky and saying, go read for 8 hours in a closet. Yeah.
One of the questions we had for you as we were reading this too is, in addition to the challenge, I guess, that Craig asked about, like, you're a narrator writing about narrators, but you don't want it to be fully autobiographical. But you're also a narrator that's writing a book that you are then going to narrate. And we were we were wondering, as you're writing, in any stage of this, is the narration aspect of it already on your mind? Is that informing what you write on the page? Or do you try to keep that part at bay, like as a phase 2, so that the words come out on the page the way that you want them to?
That is such a good question. And, the answer is that I really honestly thought I had taken into consideration what it would be like narrating it as I was writing. And then when I actually sat down to narrate it, I realized how much I hadn't thought about it. It just became like, I didn't realize how many accents I'd written into the book. I didn't realize just how meta it would feel, like recording certain scenes like that. For even just chapter 1 hit so different when I was suddenly recording it and listening to it back. So yeah, even though, part of my editorial process is reading out loud always. And I read every draft of this out loud. It's how I figure out if pacing is working, if dialogue is working. And yet somehow actually performing it was different. Making the emails work, choosing how to do that. There's a whole epistolary section that's like 100 and something pages interspersed with, action, but mostly anchored by these email and text exchanges. And like, when I was writing it, I was like, this is going to be interesting in audio. And then I just kind of didn't consider it again until I actually had to record it.
It's funny how often I see that in books now, like a text exchange, and sometimes in audio format, it can be a little annoying if they like read the email address or the timestamp every single time. And I noticed that you didn't, and I appreciated it.
Absolutely. I cut out the subject line, for instance, on all, because it's the same on all of the headers. And sometimes the date and time is necessary to understand, like, when they're overlapping each other, but sometimes it's not. And if you can because as a narrator, I've tackled those books before, and it's like, if you can cut out character names between texts, you try to find a way to make it seem as natural as it would be if you were actually reading it on the page. And that adaptation process is a choice. Every book is different. Everything requires a different approach.
I was just going to ask about the adaptation process. So you were just saying, like, sometimes you can cut out, like, their names or this or that to make that flow better in audio. Is that like a choice that you just get to make, or do you have to like talk to the author?
No, never without running it by someone. Yeah, no, I would never do that without running it by someone. I will sometimes like strongly state an opinion, but usually it's just a check-in of like, do you have a plan of attack for this? Does the author have a preference? Sometimes authors are well versed in audio, and so they know it's just gonna die. It's going to, the energy of the piece is going to drop, and they know that. And sometimes you have to explain to them that that's what's going to happen. And so therefore, how do we work around that?
So, well, getting back into, I'll try to avoid, I think on that same quiz on your website or interview on your website, it said, it's too hard to pick my favorite book that I've never narrated. So we're not going to ask that.
I so appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. We'll ask a similar question.
I was going to say, for the record, it's not like I have an answer. It's not like I'm hiding it. I literally don't have an answer. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So we'll just assume it's Addie LaRue.
Yeah, sure.
Is there anything that makes a book enjoyable for you to narrate? Not doesn't have to be like a particular book or a particular author, but like something about a book. I think like in Thank You for Listening, the person said they just got off a hard book with 300 different characters and accents and all that. So I assume it's not that. But is there something about certain books that when they get brought to you? Like, oh, I love these types of books.
Yeah, I think I have a couple of different answers to that, because it depends on the book. But I think that the actor part of me loves a really voicey first person narrative. Like, give me a character that I can really sink my teeth into. The writer part of me enjoys really well written literary uh prose, like, just, let me just bathe in the beauty of someone who knows how to construct a sentence. um I think that the challenging ones are, of course, when the performance demands something that, like, I think in the reference that you're saying, and thank you for listening, is talking about like a World War II epic. And yeah, war epics are always difficult because you've got a ton of different accents and a lot of action and screaming, and like just the toll it takes on the actual instrument is a lot. But sometimes those can be the most rewarding because it really does feel like you're just so immersed in the story. Um, and so that can be a really beautiful experience. So yeah, I think it depends. I mean, not to cop out again and like not have a definitive answer to this, but it really does just depend on the voice of the piece, the book. I mean, Addie was all jokes aside, like Addie was an incredible experience, and I'm really proud of that audiobook. And it was a joy to narrate.
You almost read my next question for me. We were going to ask, it doesn't have to be like your favorite book you ever did, but is there a book that you're really particularly proud of? Like you listened to the final product and you just felt really good about it?
There are a few. Yeah, there are a few. And I think that this job takes a while to figure out how to do. Like, it's not natural, really. I mean, I came to it very naturally. I always enjoyed it from the beginning, but actually feeling like I was capable at it took a really long time. And so now I'm at the point where I feel capable, but then, like, how do I keep leveling up? And so I set myself certain challenges. And two books recently that come to mind, there are Addie LaRue, which was a discussion that I had with the author, with V, about the best way to translate this book to audio and how to make that character make sense to people just hearing her. And so there were some very specific choices that we made that I was scared to make because I don't mean to be cryptic about this. I will, if you want to take the time, I will explain what I'm talking about. But okay. The challenge with that book is obviously that you start out, you have a 24-year-old French girl, and in 300 years, her accent has been sort of stripped away for the most part, but she is still 24. But what I wanted to have happen is that I wanted to hear those 300 years in her voice. So even though her actual, vocal cords are still 24 years old, what she has seen and what she has lived through and experienced weighs on her. So that would be one thing if that book had been told in a linear fashion. But because it bounces back and forth between time periods, my concern as an actor who is, worried that people aren't going to like your performance is that people would think I couldn't hold the accent or that I couldn't hold the voice. And there was kind of a moment where V and I were Skyping about this. And I just realized that, like, I had to get out of my own way. And like, this book deserved my total commitment to what I really felt was the best way to interpret this. And like, if people didn't get it, I would just take my lumps. Like, I would just say, okay, that's okay. But people got it. And it was such a good lesson in trusting the listener to understand what you're doing. So that was really, really gratifying.
I have chills hearing that, like the level of nuance that goes into artistically, like creating the voice for this entity. Thank you so much for sharing that.
No, yeah. I mean, that book, those are the ones that are challenging. And that's why I wanted to talk to V, because it's also not just Addie, it's also Luke. Like, Luke becomes a person over the course of that book. He's not really at the beginning. And then he just imitates her and the other humans he interacts with to the degree where he becomes a really good mimic. And so his phrasing changes, his his whole thing changed. Like it's keeping track of where each character was at as you'd bounce back and forth through time was challenging, but really rewarding.
So with that book, you just read it linearly, right? Like from like page 1 to the end. It's not like how they film movies sometimes where like, oh, we did all the,
Yeah, no.
Sounds hard.
I think I've only done a couple of times where I have recorded things in chunks where like, for some reason, I would get a book that should have absolutely been 2 narrators, where it's like 2 alternating chapters from 2 different character POVs. And for whatever reason, they didn't hire a second narrator. So I was doing everything. And so there's been a couple of times where I have recorded things out of sequence. Like I've done all of one character's chapters straight through, and then the other just to stay in the voice. And then I've cut it together for them. But typically that doesn't happen.
Actually, you just made me think of another question that's not on our script. So sorry, Karen, I'm going off script here.
I love it.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody hold on.
It's not, I've set it up too much now. In my mind, I know nothing about like the recording process for audiobooks. So I'm so excited to talk to you and ask questions. But in my mind, I picture like when they're filming or doing the audio for like animated films, and you always see those shots on like YouTube or whatever, where it's like they're all in the same room, standing around each other with their scripts and whatever. And in my mind, I just assumed that's how it was done if there was multiple narrators.
Yeah, but that's almost never how it's done.
I learned that by listening to your new novel.
Oh, good. Okay, it's educational too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
When the main character and the male narrator, they're like sending each other stuff and back and forth and asking questions like, how are you going to deliver this line? Because I need to know for this. And I was like, is that really how it's done? That seems so difficult. Is it like like dialogue parts? Like how do you just like skip over the part that the other person's going to read and just kind of hear it in your head and then respond, and then some poor editor somewhere has to edit all of this together?
Right. So you can understand how when I was writing this book, I was like, there were multiple times when I was like, why did I do this to myself? Because having to explain all of this from the ground up and then somehow still also tell a story was like, this is insanity. So the answer is that there are 2 distinct styles of narration that we're dealing with when you've got more than one narrator. One is dual narration, which is alternating perspectives. Gone Girl is dual narration. Duet narration is when you are literally alternating lines, like a radio drama kind of feel. So I kind of had my cake and I ate it too in this book, where it starts out as dual narration, where they're just doing their individual sections and then they are approximating the other person's dialogue in their own voice within their sections. See, this is how quickly it goes off the rails. Like, what am I talking about? But then when you get to the last 2 episodes of this project they're working on, I break into duet narration as the characters become closer. So at that point that they are in the studio together doing lines back and forth, trading them off. But even when you're doing that, there is still someone is handling, like each one of those sections is still from one character's point of view, even if the other person is doing their dialogue within it, but they're still handling the narrative. Yeah.
This is blowing my mind.
Me too.
I had no idea.
So, I mean, I have not done a lot of duet actually. And the ones I've done have been like for Lauren Blakely, where it's not even a romance scene. I'm just doing it with like Andy Arndt and I did some of Lauren's work together. Erin Mallon, for Pale Blue Dots, we did some, it was a whole group. And so therefore it was done as like, but we were all doing that remotely. That was the height of the pandemic. We were in our separate booths, all Skyping in, doing, or Zooming in or whatever the hell it was we were doing, making that work. But it's very rare that you end up with the other narrator in studio.
Is that just because one person's in New York and one person's in LA, or is it just like that's just not how it's done?
Yeah, I think, a lot of it is just, this is an industry that does not like spending money on anything. And I think also it's it's just not done that much. It's really, that is rarely done. You are usually doing discrete sections back and forth, in which case you don't need the other person present, but it does require facilitating communication so that you are all on the same page with things. I mean, this gets to be the organizational part of this when it gets to be like, we're talking about romance audio where you have like a male and female or female, male perspective. But when you get into audiobooks with like 7 different narrators or something, and we're all on an email chain, like trying to coordinate pronunciations and like character voice,
do you actually send like little audio clips back and forth like they do in the book? Like, is that a thing? You're like, this is how I'm thinking of saying it.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
I mean, if you respect your fellow narrators, you're doing that.
Right. Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's always that moment when you're doing a multicast thing where like, you're kind of like, who's going to go first?
Yeah.
Because like someone's got to make the call on this. Like someone's got to start this off. Who's recording first? You know, what do you need from me? It requires a level of coordination and at the same time, absolutely knowing everyone understands we're never going to sound like the other narrator.
Right.
Like you can give me your character voices that you're doing, and I will use that as a trigger for how I'm going to do it in my voice, but I'm never going to actually convincingly sound like you. This medium sometimes is just, I'm just like, how we have gotten away with doing what we do. It blows my mind.
And here we are. Like it's going, it's successful.
It's happy. Yeah. People like it.
Yes. One of the questions, kind of going back to what we were talking about in terms of how you work with the authors and get, preferential things from them around, the emails and how those are read. One of the things we were wondering, first of all, like I know, and it sounds like there are many authors that you've worked with repeatedly on several books in their catalog. And so we both realized we have no idea what the first part of that process is. Like, how does the work come to you? Does the author reach out to you and say, I'm your biggest fan, can you narrate my audiobook? Or how does it come to be that, you are Addie LaRue?
So, okay, this is where there's a pretty strong divide between the way indie publishing works and then the way that traditional publishing works.
Okay.
So on the indie side of it, there are marketplaces for authors to put up their projects and have narrators audition for them. And once that is, they select their narrator, they go into production. The narrator is usually handling production for the author. So that's really, the author is in control of that. On traditional publishing, which is where I do 99% of my work at this point, I open my inbox and I get an email from any of the publishers or audio producers that I work with. And that's about 15 to 20 different clients probably. And they say, we have this book, here's the author, here's the synopsis, here's when we would need it done. What are your thoughts? And most of the time for me, it comes down to scheduling. And then I obviously will prioritize authors that I, love. And I mean, like, I know Emily Henry's publishing dates probably before Emily does, because I'm just like, I got to keep it in mind for my schedule. And at that point, it's like, that's when I can look at what the project is. But I don't have the time, no one does, to actually read the book before you commit to doing it. And from the author's side of it, when I was first starting, there was really like a firewall between authors and narrators. You did not talk to them. And I think part of it was the producers like wanting to protect the narrators from some really like overzealous author who had opinions about everything. But as authors have gotten to learn that audio is really important, you should care about audio. It's a way that people find your book that they wouldn't otherwise find your book. Narrator selection is important. You start to see now more the author involved a little bit more. It can be that they are actually given approval in their contract. They are given, consult at least. So that usually by the time something gets to me, it's like the author has said, if we can get her, I would love to have Julia.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
When books have multiple books, like a trilogy or something, do contracts get signed where like you're locked in for a whole trilogy? Because I've read books where like the narrator changes on like the third book and it is the worst.
I know. It's worse. It's terrible for everyone. No one likes that. And so to answer your question, no, there is no, we are independent contractors. So we literally, they can't make us do anything.
Right.
But so sometimes that is a problem of timing. I mean, sometimes that is, if you want a day and date audiobook, like if you want the audiobook out on the day that your print comes out, and your narrator isn't available, sometimes you have to just make the decision, or the narrator isn't narrating anymore, or things like that happen. And it's terrible for everyone. I took over a series from someone once and I swore I would never do it again because the reviews were so bad because I wasn't the original narrator.
Right. Even if you narrate it really, really good, it's like they're never going to like it. Yeah.
They're never going to like it. I was like, trust me, I didn't like it. I don't like jumping in, not knowing what I'm doing.
Right.
Like, I have had someone take over. I don't remember if they took over. I don't think they took over a series from me, but they took over a spinoff from me, like a spinoff of the series. And I sent them all of my character files and my pronunciations and everything, because I was just like, let's try to like minimize how much damage we can do here.
Yeah.
What is a character file? Is this like notes on how this character should be read, basically, or?
Yeah, it's descriptions that I've gleaned from all of the books, the previous books in the series, as well as my actual voice samples that I keep of characters from series. If a character, I have learned at this point in doing this job that if I am recording a book and a character opens its mouth, I am clipping that audio and putting it in a file, in a folder for that series, because I don't know if the author is going to bring that character back 5 books later.
Gotcha.
You can't. Yeah. It's a podcast, so no one can see me, but I think my brain just exploded. I am the mind blown emoji currently.
I am too, and I'll ask one more like sub bullet to this conversation.
Sure.
This is a super weird question, but thinking about how you have to develop the voices for all of these characters, and sometimes hundreds of them in the same book, and as you're going through that decision-making process and creating the character file, it almost feels like you personally have to like audition different versions of the same character to decide like who's going to make the cut. How do you make that decision, and do you involve other people to say like, okay, which of these Lukes do you like the best, for example? Or
Right. Well, Luke is an anomaly because, and I told V this, but I read Luke and I just went, oh, I know him. There's a good friend of mine from college, an actor, who I just was like, okay, so he'll play him in the movie. Like, it's not even close. Like, this guy just came fully formed as like, oh, this is him. So I was basically, my Luke is an impression of what I think my friend would have done with that character.
And that's so cool.
What did your friend, I assume you told your friend this, right?
I did. And he's now read the book and like absolutely loves it. And but he was like, gee, thanks. I was like,
that was going to be I was like, I don't know if I would like that,
I was like, no, well, too bad. It's like, I got to do whatever I want to do. And so but under normal circumstances, when something isn't as clear as like Luke jumping off the page at me, the part of the calculus that goes into that is honestly figuring out where that character fits in the web of the story. So when I read a book and I prep a book for the first time, I keep a character list of any speaking role and then any vocal traits that the author gives them, any biographical information that I need to have. And then I look at which characters are like most often in scenes together. Yeah. So what are those constellations? If it's a family, like who are they? If it's a workplace thing or a school thing, who are the characters that are constantly in conversation with each other? So I work backwards from that, differentiating characters that I know are going to be talking a lot to each other. So I don't just create characters in isolation, is I guess what I'm saying. I think about how they fit into the whole.
I had never even thought about that. Yeah. If you have 3 people that are always talking to each other, they have to be distinct from from one another, or it's going to
right.
be
And that can
confusing.
get complicated. And like, I mean, I remember there would be some YA novels like set in boarding schools or set in, you know, where it's just like 12 different teenage girls. And how do you do that and make that clear to a listener? You know, that's the task.
Oof, yeah. I would not even know where to start on that.
You figure it out.
One voice at a time.
There's no rule for this. No one teaches you how to do this. There's no rule. You figure it out.
To shift gears slightly away from the audiobook recording process, I had written down, like, when we knew we were going to talk with you, I had written down a note, like, talk about AI. And then I was listening to your book and I was like, oh my God, she talks about AI in her book. I was like, now I have to ask. So I obviously, for people that may not know, I'll just give like a quick little thing. There's lots of websites and apps and companies right now that are building AI where you can dump text into it, choose a voice, and it spits out a somewhat human sounding narration that, you know, has dips and lows and it sounds kind of human. And in your book, again, without any spoilers, there's, you know, two narrators talking, and I think he compares himself to a dinosaur, and he's talking about retirement, and he says this AI audiobook thing is going to be the meteor that takes out the dinosaur. And I don't necessarily agree with that, but, you know, who knows, I guess. I'm sure you've thought about this a lot. And I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts on this, like, emerging technology?
Yeah. You know, I think this is like a perfect place to talk about this, actually. And when I was writing the book, you know, over the last 3 years, I knew this section it had to be addressed because it's a huge part of our industry, but it was also like impossible to, every time I would do a new draft, there would be new information out there publicly available. And so I was just like, how far do I go in this? Because by the time it's published, it's going to be like old news, or it's 5 years from now, people are going to be like, I can't believe they had this conversation in this book, you know? So it has been an up to the minute thing that everybody in our industry has their eye on. And I think that, you know, look, I think we're naive to think that, like, as you said, it's already here. First of all, it's already a service that is being provided. And I also think that there's something about, we can't think that, like, what other industry has survived automation in its original form. What I think we can do, and this is where I see the community of narrators who are truly, truly, and I mean this, some of the best people I have ever met. Like, these are the best of actors and literate people, readers, thoughtful humanists, who, we know we're not going to compete with the robots, but we can keep elevating the craft of what we do as something that is not that. This is a separate thing. The one thing AI can't do, because it can produce your audiobook much cheaper and much faster, but it does not know what it's saying.
Right.
The thing you get with a human voice is that I know at the end of the book, when you put that callback into the thing that you're referencing, something that happened at the beginning, I remember that thing. And because I read the book before I ever started recording, I know that that thing that you are foreshadowing is something I want to play with the entire time I read the book, so that when I get to the end and you call it back, it calls back. It makes sense. It connects. Those are things that right now can't be replaced. And so for us, it's going to be very disruptive. I don't want to undersell how disruptive this is going to be. This is going to change the industry. But I do think that there is a place for what we do. And part of why I wanted to write a book about this is to show the human face behind this job, and is to elevate the profile of the narrator in the public consciousness. Because I think, you know, authors are going to have to start deciding, do they care? Do they want a human versus AI? Publishers are going to have to start deciding this. and consumers.
Yeah.
You know,
are any audio or any publishers or audiobook providers doing this currently? Because like I mean, I look at the Libro website every single day, obviously, because I work on it, and I've never seen like narrated by blank or narrated by like a robot. And I'm wondering, like, is this actually? I know the technology is out there.
And again, I think part of it has to do with labeling. So, like, as far as publishers go, no, not yet. But some of the indie projects that may be distributed may have been narrated by a robot and not been disclosed. Right now, you're, on in the Death Star in Audible, you can't upload a book that has been narrated by AI.
I see. Okay.
Because they just don't want it on the platform,
they don't want it on the platform. Yeah. And I think that they have their own reasons for that. I don't begin to understand what they're probably developing.
AWS has their own text to speech.
So I have a feeling that rule is going to change as soon as they can monetize it. But
that sounds about right.
Right. I mean, why not? But for the time being, that's the rule. Now, do things slip by? Every once in a while, people, especially other narrators, find a book that they're like, this is 110% text to speech, and it slipped through the all of the checks that you're supposed to check to have a book up there. But yeah, this is what I mean by it's an ever shifting thing. This is a week to week thing. And for the narrators, I think that the big question becomes, how do we protect ourselves in all of this? Because I'm not someone who's going to stand there and say, like, you should never license your voice or something, but you have to be able to protect where that goes. A lot of the really egregious stuff that's happened so far has been people who license their voices to companies that they now sell it to third party stuff. And that's how you end up with your voice narrating things you don't want, or companies you did not contract with. It's really the Wild West right now. It is really, really all options are on the table.
I mean, there was that huge legal issue, right, with Beverly
TikTok.
Standing and TikTok. Yeah, where she had no idea that her voice was going to be like made to be able to say anything, and then they ended up having to change it, right? I forget exactly how that ended, but I feel like the TikTok voice changed.
Yeah, and it's but again, like all of this stuff, this is all, and that's the point I make in the book, is like all of this is a court battle. All of this is like, how much money do you have to fight this?
I mean, that's what the character says, right? Like, yeah, like, but what are you going to do? Like, take them to court? Like, how much money that would take, et cetera. Yeah. Is there like
there's just, the laws have yet to be written. That's the thing. The general issue is like, our technology is outpacing our laws. So with everything, so privacy with everything. So like, how do you, we're not going to avoid that.
Yeah. It's tough because when I think about like a small independent author who probably isn't attached to a publisher and whatever, like the idea that they could like make an audiobook for relatively cheap is an interesting idea. But at the end, like thinking about like where this could go, and like I hate the term slippery slope, but like it makes me be like, well, I don't know, read it yourself, I guess. That's the cheaper way to do it.
I mean, look, also, if that's let's be honest, like the AI is going to start writing the books too at a certain point. So like, you're not, for me, the argument I always make, which of course I understand that, and every author, especially indie, who is running their own business, make your decisions for your business, but I think something that often gets lost in this conversation is, again, what the narrator brings to the audio. And it's not just a voice. And it's not just what I said earlier of knowing what it's saying. It is also loyalty that listeners have to a certain voice.
Yep.
Like
absolutely,
if you're going to use a text to speech, that they're not going to find your book any way other than it just exists. It's just an audiobook that exists, but they're not searching for a narrator and then find your book.
Totally. Yeah. And your comment earlier about like, well, I had to think that she'd seen 300 years of this, so I had to like change the way I said it. Like, that's not going to happen with AI, not anytime soon anyway, So like,
no,
I don't know. I don't like this new dystopian future we're talking about.
Oh, it is uncanny valley. Like we're there. And I think that, there's a, this is the whole thing is so surreal. And this industry was, I think, we just started, a bunch of narrators got together and started PANA, which is a Professional Audiobook Narrators Association. And one of the questions we asked ourselves as we were forming this is like, are we too late? Like, is this even a thing? Like, and the answer was yes, because this is exactly when we need to band together. Like, this is exactly when we need to start having these conversations and teaching each other how to do this and passing this on as like the craft that this really is, because it's existential for a lot of people. I mean, this is a job. This is like these are the minds closing. This is a big deal for a lot of people, and not just narrators, but the editors and the proofers and audiobook producers, and everyone's going to have to learn how to exist in this new world.
One of the things that you said that rings so true from my job. So I'm responsible for customer experience at Libro.fm. And so all the tickets that come in, I'm talking to customers all day long. And there is a distinct theme throughout customer conversations, which is that affinity for particular narrators. Our customers love to recommend things to us. They'll listen to something and say, if you haven't heard this one yet, the narrator's amazing.
That's so sweet.
And it's just really exciting to hear that. And, customers will say, I love this narrator. Are they doing anything else? Do you know when their next book is coming out? And you're totally right. Like that is just an irreplaceable relationship.
Well, and that's why I do think these things can coexist. I was much more pessimistic about this when I was first starting to write the book. And so even that conversation between the characters sort of changed, where it's like, do you want to run an audiobook studio? Which is basically what he's telling her, is like the business of doing this may be different. And that was something where it was like, yeah, we are. I mean, I don't know how long people are going to need to go into a studio for anymore. I don't know how long we have on that. There's certain things that are, this is an ever evolving thing. And I think they can coexist, though. I'm more optimistic, believe it or not, than I was a year ago when all of this stuff started kind of coming to the surface. But we'll see. I don't pretend to know this. I don't know.
How could one know?
No. Yeah.
Well, and I'm sure this is not a unique question at all, but selfishly, I would just love to know, in terms of your world, like, who are your idols? Who are the people that you look up to in the narration world, and maybe people who have inspired you or informed the way that you think about the work that you do?
That's a very good question. When I was first starting out, I would say I was listening to Cass Campbell a lot. I was listening to Dion Graham. I was listening to Simon Vance, Eduardo Ballerini. And I think that Bonnie Turpin, obviously, like there's just certain people who are so distinctive and really bring everything that I know about them personally. And that's, again, this is what I mean. The argument for human narration is I know who these people are, and I know what they bring to the work. And that's why you can't imitate that. Like I always tell other narrators, when they are starting out, and it's like, don't try to be someone else. The only way this works is you have to bring you to it. That's it. And you'll learn within your own parameters of like how much of yourself to bring to any given piece, how much you should pull back, you should go further in. All of that stuff is the stuff you learn about yourself. Don't try to be someone else. But those are the people that I think showed me what was possible in the industry. Katie Kellgren. Oh, Katie.
Yeah. I get so excited every time we do an episode of the podcast. We say this every time, but my list of things I want to listen to next gets very long. I'm like making a note of all of these names to go find their work after this.
Yeah. There's good people doing this job, and not just good artists, but good people.
Well, Obviously, we are huge fans of your book. Everyone who is listening, you should go out and order. Thank you for listening right away. We loved it. I will never be forgiven by my coworkers if I don't ask this, but is there anything that we should have our eyes and ears out for in the future from you that you're able to share with us?
Oh, well, okay. So obviously, Taylor Jenkins Reid has a new book coming out at the end of August, and it's going to be another multicast thing. Carrie Soto is back. It's going to be fantastic. I can already tell you that. There's I am narrating. Well, wait. This is where I have to do the thing of like, has it been announced yet? By the time this book comes out, I think, you know what? It's up on Audible, so I'm going to go ahead and say it. I'm going to be doing with two amazing co-narrators the two new Cormac McCarthy books.
Amazing.
In the fall, and they are
awesome.
Incredible. And the first one I will be doing with my old college friend, McLeod Andrews. And the second one I'll be doing with Eduardo Ballerini. And
oh my gosh, I cannot wait.
they're incredible. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just, this job at this point is just, for me, an embarrassment of riches. I'm so lucky to get what I get and to get to live in these books. It's thrilling.
Well, it's thrilling for your listeners too. So we thank you for sharing that. I am so excited right now.
Oh, well, good. No, like I said, I mean, I don't even know what I can talk about and what I can't, but whatever, we just did it. So it's fine.
Yeah.
Well, hey, if we need to edit later, let us know.
And we promise to keep
our lips sealed.
It's been announced. Like I said, it's up there. It's been announced. I don't take any responsibility for that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and spending an hour with us and, letting us know all these inside things that were, mind blowing to us and telling us about your book and everything. It's been so nice to get to know you and chat over the last, 40 minutes or so.
It's been really nice talking to you all. I feel like kind of really honestly, like coming home, like this was just a really nice island and everything of people who love this work and who understand it on a certain level and a listenership that wants to know more. So this was just truly wonderful.
I like to think about it like that. A little island, audiobook island.
Yeah.
No robots allowed,
Yeah. They can't swim either.
Yeah. Oh, there. See? Awesome. Well, on that note.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for listening. We really hope you enjoyed that interview. There were about 1 million other questions we wanted to ask Julia, so I'm sure we'll have her back on the podcast in the future. If there are other authors or narrators you want us to chat with, please shoot us an email at hello@libro.fm and tell us who we should reach out to.
And just a reminder, if you haven't tried Libro.fm yet, don't forget to sign up using promo code LibroPodcast to get an extra free credit when you start a membership.
As always, thank you for listening.